Hello, everyone. Today we're going to talk about Macbeth, Act 3. In our discussions of Macbeth, we've been focusing on how language affects thinking and how language affects thinking about the future. In Act 3, these themes undergo significant developments. Although Macbeth has now fulfilled the witch's prophecy and become the king, we see him nevertheless becoming increasingly obsessed with the future. We see how thinking about the future affects the present. When Act 3, Scene 1 begins, Macbeth has been crowned the King of Scotland, but he is not satisfied. He does not feel fulfilled. He says to himself, "To be thus is nothing, but to be safely thus. Our fears in Banquo stick deep, and in his royalty of nature reigns that which would be feared." Macbeth has gotten what he wanted, what he killed Duncan to get, the crown, but he finds that this is nothing to him. He remembers that the witches prophesied that none of his children would be kings, but instead, Banquo's successors would one day be kings. Does that mean that Banquo or his children are threats to Macbeth? That Macbeth won't be king for long? Or that Banquo's successors will become kings in the far distant future? Macbeth doesn't know, but he doesn't feel safely king. And that is already enough to take away any sense of pleasure or sense of accomplishment he might feel in being the king. I don't think, though, that Macbeth is only afraid of being hurt or killed by Banquo or one of his children. As he says to himself a few lines later, "Then, prophet-like, they, the witches, hailed him, Banquo, father to a line of kings. Upon my head they placed a fruitless crown, and put a barren scepter in my grip, thence to be wrenched with an unlineal hand, no son of mine succeeding. If it be so, for Banquo's issue have I filed my mind. For them the gracious Duncan have I murdered, put rancors in the vessel of my peace, only for them, and mine eternal jewel, given to the common enemy of man, to make them kings, the seeds of Banquo kings. Rather than so, come fate into the list, and champion me to the utterance." Macbeth doesn't really feel like the King of Scotland, even though he is the King of Scotland. He describes his crown as fruitless, his scepter as barren. If he isn't the beginning of a line of kings, then his reign as king will come and go, and essentially be lost to time, and in a way might as well never have happened. He might as well never have been king. From his perspective, he will have killed Duncan for nothing. For Macbeth, the present doesn't seem to matter if it doesn't in some sense extend into the future, if its consequences don't somehow continue into the future. That might sound like an arrogant, megalomaniacal thought, but I don't think it is really, or at least I don't think it's a weird thought. Many people want to be remembered, want the things they do to make an impact on the future, don't want their existence to simply be forgotten in the course of time. Macbeth's desire might be exaggerated, but I don't think it's exceptional. For many people, the meaning of the present depends on the future. So what does Macbeth do? He tries to control the future. He calls in two men and tries to convince them to assassinate Banquo and his son. Now, we should note how Macbeth tries to convince these two men to do this. He's apparently already told them that Banquo has been somehow responsible for keeping them from advancing in their careers. He says to them, "Well then, now, have you considered of my speeches? Know that it was he in the times past which held you so under fortune, which you thought had been our innocent self. This I made good to you in our last conference, passed in probation with you how you were borne in hand, how crossed, the instruments, who wrought with them, and all things else that might to half a soul and to a notion crazed, say, thus did Banquo." What is Macbeth doing here? He's trying to get these two men to do something, to manipulate them, through speech. That might remind you of what the witches did to him. Consider this too. He asked them, "Are you so gospel to pray for this good man and for his issue, whose heavy hand hath bowed you to the grave and beggared yours forever?" In other words, are you so kind and religious that you're going to take this from Banquo? They reply, "We are men, my liege." And Macbeth returns, "Aye, in the catalogue you go for men, as hounds and greyhounds, mongrels, spaniels, curs, shows, water rugs, and demi-wolves are clept all by the name of dogs. The valued file distinguishes the swift, the slow, the subtle, the housekeeper, the hunter, every one, according to the gift which bounteous nature hath in him closed, whereby does he receive particular addition from the bill that writes them all alike. And so of men. Now, if you have a station in the file, not in the worst rank of manhood, say it, and I will put that business in your bosoms, whose execution takes your enemy off, grapples you to the heart and love of us, who wear our health but sickly in his life, which in his death were perfect. What is Macbeth saying here? He's saying, you're classified as men, of course, but there are many kinds of men, like there are many kinds of dogs. Are you the kind of men who will take revenge against someone who has wronged you? He's questioning, taunting their manhood. That might remind you of someone too. That might remind you of Lady Macbeth, who told Macbeth he wasn't a man if he wouldn't kill Duncan. At the start of the play, Macbeth said he was willing to accept the fate the witches prophesied for him if it really was his fate. But now he's doing something else. Now, like the witches, like Lady Macbeth, he's trying to manipulate other people so as to influence the course of the future. All of these ideas get amplified in Act 3, Scene 2. At the start of the scene, Lady Macbeth says to herself, "Naught's had, all's spent, where our desire is got without content. 'Tis safer to be that which we destroy, than by destruction dwell in doubtful joy." She doesn't feel secure in her role as queen either. She doesn't feel safe. Her joy is doubtful. When Macbeth enters, he tells her that he's feeling insecure as well. "We have scorched the snake, not killed it. She'll close and be herself, whilst our poor malice remains in danger of her former tooth. But let the frame of things disjoint, both the world suffer, ere we will eat our meal in fear, and sleep in the affliction of these terrible dreams that shake us nightly. Better be with the dead, whom we, to gain our peace, have sent to peace, than on the torture of the mind to lie in restless ecstasy. Duncan is in his grave. After life's fitful fever, he sleeps well. Treason has done his worst, nor steel, nor poison, malice domestic, foreign levy, nothing can touch him further." Macbeth, who is the King of Scotland, still seems to envy Duncan, the king he has killed. He seems to envy Duncan that he's dead. Dead, Duncan is at peace. He sleeps well. Treason has done its worst to Duncan already. Nothing can touch him further. Everything that can happen to Duncan has happened, while Macbeth, who does not know what's going to happen next, experiences, as he puts it, torture of the mind. Macbeth can't bear the uncertainty of what will happen to him and his kingship in the future. It ruins his present. Macbeth feels so insecure in the present that he envies the security Duncan has in death. Macbeth doesn't tell his wife that he's going to have Banquo and his son Fleance killed. He only tells her he's going to do something dreadful. But look at the language he uses as he's going to tell her this. "There's comfort yet. They, Banquo and Fleance, are assailable. Then be thou jocund. Ere the bat hath flown his cloistered flight, ere to black Hecate's summons the shard-born beetle with his drowsy hums hath rung night's yawning peal, there shall be done a deed of dreadful note." Macbeth tells Lady Macbeth that something dreadful is going to happen before the bat flies that night, before the beetles start to hum that night, before Hecate, who is the goddess of witches, summons these creatures of the night. Macbeth is speaking like the witches. In a way, he's becoming like them, or maybe he finds he now wants their power. At the very least, the language of the play is drawing a comparison between Macbeth and the witches. He, like the witches, is trying to meddle with the course of the future. How is Macbeth's attempt to control the future going to go? We don't know yet. We haven't finished the play. But we get a sense in one of the play's biggest and most famous scenes, Act 3, Scene 4, the banquet scene. Macbeth and Lady Macbeth host a royal banquet with various lords of Scotland. At the start of the banquet, one of the murderers comes in and says Banquo was killed, but Banquo's son, Fleance, got away. Macbeth tries to reassure himself that he's safe for the moment, as Fleance is still too young to be a threat to him. There the grown serpent lies. The worm that's fled hath nature that in time will venom breed. no teeth for the present. Banquo, the grown serpent, lies there dead, and Fleance, the worm, isn't dangerous, doesn't have any venom yet. But, as you know from reading the play or watching the film, before Macbeth can sit down to eat, Banquo's bloody ghost appears to him in the dining room. Now, there are witches in this play, there are ghosts in many of Shakespeare's other plays. Is Banquo's ghost a real ghost that appears only to Macbeth, or is Macbeth hallucinating again? We don't know. Lady Macbeth says, "This is the very painting of your fear. This is the air-drawn dagger which you said led you to Duncan." She tells him he's hallucinating, he's losing control, whereas Macbeth insists it's real. Whether or not it's real, Macbeth says to the ghost, "What man dare, I dare. Approach thou like the rugged Russian bear, the armed rhinoceros, or the Hyrcan tiger. Take any shape but that, and my firm nerves shall never tremble. Or be alive again, and dare me to the desert with thy sword. If trembling I inhabit then, protest me the baby of a girl." Macbeth, as we know, is not a coward. He's had a career as a brave general. He tells the ghost, "Appear to me as a bear, a rhinoceros, a tiger, and I could deal with that. Appear as Banquo alive, and I could deal with that. Take any shape but the one you're taking, the shape of Banquo dead." So what is Macbeth afraid of here? If he begs the ghost to appear as Banquo alive rather than Banquo dead, it seems he's less afraid of Banquo than of what he did to Banquo. Macbeth is afraid of what he's done. Killing Duncan, and killing Duncan's guards, and killing Banquo, and doing everything he's felt he's had to do to become and remain king, has left him guilty about his past and afraid of his uncertain future. Behind him are terrible things he's done. Ahead of him might be terrible things that will happen to him. And we see, at the end of this scene, that Macbeth's paranoia is only growing. He asks his wife what she thinks of the fact that Macduff didn't come to this dinner, though he was invited, and then says, "I will send. There's not a one of them but in his house I keep a servant feed." In every Thane's house, he keeps a servant feed, a spy. He's spying on all the noblemen of Scotland, waiting for someone to betray him. And he then adds, "I will tomorrow, and betimes I will, to the weird sisters. More shall they speak, for now I am bent to know by the worst means the worst." He's going back to the witches to find out more from them. Macbeth is the most powerful person in Scotland, but he will not feel like the most powerful person in Scotland until he knows and controls the future.